So, hi everyone, my name is Rachel Hayat. I am currently a postdoc at the Center for Reproducible Science at the University of Zurich. However, the work that I'm going to present to you today has been a project that I did while I was still working as a statistician at the Swiss National Science Foundation. So the conflict of interest that I have to disclose is pretty obvious. So most of the authors were either employed at the SNSF during the work, or like Matthias Egger is still the president of the National Research Council. So we are all on the same page, and you all get a bit familiar with processes and the data that I'm going to talk about now. I will show you some drawings. So on the next two slides, you'll get familiar with the funding decision-making process that was employed by the SNSF prior to 2022, so prior to the method that I'm going to present to you next. So let us assume we have our brilliant scientist here, and she has a great idea, so she writes up a proposal and submits it to the funding agency, so the SNSF. Then the funder, the office, has a bunch of admin work to do. They try to find external reviewers, collect reviewer reports. They also build a panel of experts that are gonna discuss this project. They also decide on a referee for each of the proposals that are submitted. So our brilliant scientist's proposal also gets assigned a referee. Then some time passes, so that the panel members can all get familiar with the proposals that are going to be discussed. The panel meets. At the panel meeting, the referee then presents the proposal of our brilliant scientist, and maybe even suggests to give a certain grade. And then afterwards, there's a lot of discussion. All the panel members can ask questions. They also have all the material on all the proposals. And then all the panel members will cast a vote, and this is done in an electronic and anonymous manner. So now we are back at the funder, so at the office, and what the funder now has is, well, they collect the data on the individual votes done in the panel meeting in such a matrix. So for example, here we have 5 proposals that were evaluated and voted upon by 11 voters. So back then, the grading of the SNSF was done on a 6-point scale from A, which is the best, to D, which is the worst. Then the office, after this panel meeting, translated these grades from A to D into a numeric scale, from where 6 is the best and 1 would be a D, so the worst. And then they average these individual votes. So our brilliant scientist proposal would get a 4.55 on average. This is number 1 in this matrix. And then if you look at the second row, number 2, got a 4.6. However, if you look closely at these grades, number 1 and number 2 got exactly the same grades, but voter 5 had a conflict of interest. So they did not vote. They were not allowed to vote for this particular proposal. This meant that the proposal 2 had 10 votes versus proposal 1 having 11 votes. And this affected the average. So this nicely illustrates the problem with averages and rankings that are based on the average, because now what has been done prior to 2022 was that the office would rank the proposals based on the averages, send this rank back to the panel, and this panel then discusses where to draw the funding line based on this pretty naive ranking. So you've seen that, well, averages are easy to compute. I mean, everybody in this room is able to compute an average, I guess. They're also very easy to communicate later to the applicants. However, as we've seen, effects of conflict of interest, they just seem arbitrary. We also have other abstentions. Averages are highly influenced by outliers. So if it is a panel member who's extremely strict or less strict, this might have a detrimental effect on the average and then on the outcome of the proposal. And we also want to know what is a meaningful difference. So like between, is a 4.55 really worse than a 4.6? Well, this depends on the number of proposals, number of votes, etc. So what we need is a method that allows us to split the scientific evaluation from the funding decisions. So like I said before, usually this ranking based on the average was sent back to the panel. They then decide on where to draw the funding line. And this is exactly where like very biased discussions happen, and we don't want that. And we also want the method that is able to define a funding line and maybe also a lottery group where we cannot see a difference anymore in a consistent, transparent, and reproducible way. So what we came up with as a solution, there might be others, was a Bayesian ranking approach combined with a lottery element. So I don't want to go into the technical details of this methodology, but what we essentially do is we take only this matrix that you've seen before with the individual votes, and we try to model these votes. So you have Yij, which is the estimation of the quality that the voter J tries to do of proposal I. And then we model this in a Bayesian hierarchical model, given some priors that I'm not going to go into detail. And so we want to model these panel votes. And we also, so we do this with the Bayesian hierarchical model so that we're able to kind of incorporate or like model all the dependency that we see in the data. To do this, we add theta I as a parameter, and this represents the true quality of the proposal I that we want to model. And we also add an effect for the voters. So this is this lambda ij. So depending on whether it's a more like a stricter reviewer or a panel member or more like nicer one giving higher grades. So what we're mainly interested in is this parameter for the true quality of the proposal, this theta I. And we're mainly interested in the rank of these theta I. So since it's a Bayesian hierarchical model, we are not only able to extract a point estimate for this theta, but the whole distribution of the theta and also the rank of theta, so that we can achieve such a Bayesian ranking. Because this might sound a bit abstract to some of you, I do have a representation of the funding recommendation or the kind of the final result of this methodology. So what you see here on the, so this is for a call like of project funding. So bottom-up research in the STEM panel was this. So there were 350 proposals that were evaluated and discussed and voted upon. So on the x-axis, you have all the proposals, depending on, like they're ranked based on their expected rank. So the expectation of the rank given the model. So the expected rank would be this blue points that you see in the bands. And the colored bands represent credible intervals, Bayesian credible intervals. Then now, depending on the budget that we have for a particular call, we allocate this budget to the best ranked proposals and draw a funding line, which is a provisional funding line. And then we use these credible intervals. So these are 50% credible intervals. And if they pass this provisional funding line, they would end up, the proposals would end up in a lottery group. The others that are clearly below or clearly above would be either rejected or accepted proposals. So in this case, we ended up with 4% of the proposals in the lottery group. So a rather small lottery group. All right, so far so good. Given this, with this model or with this methodology, we were able to quantify the uncertainty with respect to the true ranks. We achieved a truly comparative ranking, which is kind of what we wanted. It's because we did this model in such a way and also modeled the rank of the true quality. We kind of compared every proposal with every other proposal. So this is truly comparative. And we were able to adjust for the grading or habits of panel members, or we could even go further and use like a panel effect, etc. However, it is higher in complexity. It's like harder to communicate to the applicants, like what happened to their proposals. Also, the computation is a bit longer and more intense and needs a lot of memory. Right. However, the SNSF decided to adopt this Bayesian ranking methodology, and it will be fully integrated in their processes in fall 2022. But this was a pretty long process to initial prototyping of this method until it was finally adopted. So we have some kind of lessons learned. Bayesian ranking, this methodology it's a decision-making tool, and it is still imperfect. So mainly, we've already talked about maybe like biases in algorithms, etc. So this ranking is based on grades from panel members that might be biased. So we're kind of, this bias is not going to be gone, kind of. The only thing we lose or we improve here with respect to bias is these, that we don't need these discussions in the panel anymore to find the funding line. This is done by the methodology. It is very important to communicate the limitations of the method and also the assumptions. So we did that a lot with the panel members, with the National Research Council, so that they could kind of take a decision on whether or not they want to adopt this methodology. We realized that we should have probably started the communication a bit earlier even. So this is also a lesson learned, and should be even more transparent, even though we thought we were transparent enough, to make really it sure to the panel members that this is not a black box, it's a statistical model. I can interpret each and every parameter. But we did implement the methodology in an R package that is transparently available on GitHub if you want to try it out. And the methodology was also written up in a scientific publication that is also available now. So that's all I have to say. I'm very happy to take your questions.
As they ask their questions, and I will start over here.
John Ioannidis from Stanford. A really great presentation and very interesting to see statistical machinery really being employed in this. Prior work suggests that we have like two groups of excellent proposals and horrible proposals, and a big group of somewhere in the middle. And here you have only 4% that eventually are allocated to the lottery, which I suspect is because you have a 50% credible bound. Why not go for something like 90% or maybe even higher? I mean, I don't know how much that would expand the lottery group.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Was also a lot of discussions going in that direction. So it was a political decision to take 50% credible intervals because at the SNSF, and I assume it's also other funders that are a bit reluctant on like lotteries and not so into the idea of putting a big bunch of proposals into a lottery group. So we want to keep that as small as possible, and that's why we decided to go with 50%.
Should be more bold.
I'll switch over here.
Yeah, thank you. Lex Bouter from Amsterdam. I love this proposal, and I believe it's going to work. But like John, I don't believe that 4% makes sense. There has been a lot of research showing that ranking reliably proposals that are open, eligible for subsidy is almost impossible. Mm-hmm. You can do it randomly as equally good, and that's more fair. It leads to a more diverse result. So let's make it larger and sell it in a way, because that seems to be a problem, that it is more diversity and it's more fair and honest. And even you can put it in your CV. You can say, hey, my proposal was good enough, but I was unlucky in the draw. Mm-hmm. And that's an excellent way to write in your CV. So maybe that's my suggestion. And my question is, are you willing to try that? Matthias will like these ideas, I guess.
I guess, yeah, he would, but unfortunately he cannot take all the decisions. And I totally agree with you that there's still so much randomness in it. And I did look at 90% confidence intervals, but it's, yeah, at the current state, it's not practical. So I hope that if there's more tools like this, it gets more accepted, and eventually we can increase this lottery group. Yes, totally agree. Yeah, but I unfortunately I have no say in that.
I'm not sure I'd want being so unlucky in my CV, but you never know. Do we have some online questions?
Right. Stephen Gallo from the American Institute of Biological Scientists says, thanks for the presentation, but asks, why not just ask reviewers to rank the proposals at the end of the panel discussion, which is zero sum as opposed to rating, which is non-zero sum. There would be no calculation required in a simpler approach. What are your thoughts?
Yes. I also did think about that. It gets a bit tricky if you have 350 proposals that you have to rank. So you still have to have some summarizing machinery to kind of summarize the results and summarize also these rankings. So yes, it's definitely something that I'd like to consider in for future research. Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll go over here.
Brian Nosek, Center for Open Science. Thanks for this excellent work. The aggregation method inevitably leads to safer proposals getting funded, and the high risk or boundary pushing ones that will be more controversial end up lower in the rankings. Have you discussed the possibility of adding a golden ticket option for the reviewers so they get to pick a proposal that gets funded and all of the others are subject to the ranking?
That's an interesting idea that I haven't thought about yet. Might be something to consider, yeah. I don't have anything else to add to that, yeah, but
Thanks.
yeah, interesting idea, thank you.
Curzon of Michigan State University. Rochelle, thank you very much. First of all, also congratulations on making this open and transparent and for your efforts in open science. The other question I had was like, specifically on your algorithms. I love that you essentially reconstruct the probability distribution. As an interdisciplinary researcher, I always get in sort of like, some say like it's really bad and some say it's really good. So like, not using the mean, but actually like, using the probability distribution really helps. And so I was like, unfortunately, probably you can't go back on the slide. So if I remember on the slides, you draw from two probability distributions and you always use this tau squared. And I was wondering where the tau squared comes from in your normal distributions.
Now I'm confused.
So you like, you add in your prior, you add like, I think an alpha ij, and
Yeah.
then this alpha ij is also part of a normal distribution, which is
Yeah.
between 0 and tau s squared. And so I was wondering where this tau s squared comes from.
Yes.
I'm
Sorry,
also
to have a
happy to
blackout
do
now.
this
I think we
afterwards.
should discuss that later.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry.
No worries
Yeah,
at
because
all.
the rest of us won't understand it anyway. So you can discuss that later. Yes, thank you. Yes.
Ariel Lanswear, Baylor College of Medicine. It's a beautiful presentation. I just keep coming back to maybe we just need to give reviewers better criteria so that they can be more standardized in their assessment. Have you guys thought about addressing that end of the problem?
I mean, there are criteria that they do assess, and then they come up with an overall score, and that's the one that is being used for this methodology. Yeah. Yeah. So that actually, yeah, it depends a bit on the funding scheme. Depending on the funding scheme, you have different criteria that might be more nuanced to this particular funding scheme. If you want to have more like, I don't know, like risky research and stuff like that. So this particular funding scheme is like project funding, bottom-up research. Yeah.
So I guess, let me give you an example. In the clinical world, we used to just say a resident, oh, never mind. Thank you.
No, I wasn't cutting you off. Sorry. No.
Oh.
I was saying no more questions.
In the clinical world, we used to just say, can a resident assess a patient?
Yeah.
And now we have 10-point milestones, which give very specific, it's like a paragraph you have to read. And so 10 different clinicians who are rating that resident can say exactly where on the scale they fall. And if a funder said, these are the things that are important to me in the research that you're evaluating, you could reduce inter-reviewer variation, which would address some of the variability. It's still going to be variable what matters to the reviewer, which is clearly an important component. The funder wants the opinion of the reviewer based on their expertise. But if there was better guidance, maybe that would reduce the variability and give you clearer guidance about whose project best met the goals of the funder.
I can say something about that. This project was also part of a larger project at the SNSF to find like a unified evaluation procedure for all the different funding schemes, or most of them at least. So this was just part of that, and part of this unified evaluation procedure project was also to reevaluate and redefine the scale. So actually now there's not a 1 to 6, but a 1 to 9 scale, which I'm not so sure whether this actually helps anything, but they do have now like clear guidance on what does a 1 mean and what does a 9 mean. So maybe that will help in the future, but there's no data yet.
Great. Thank you. Thank you